Hi, my name is Ramon Widmonte, and it's a real honor to be delivering this video Dvar Torah for Parashat Vayera. At the very beginning of Vayera, the Torah presents us with the image of three angels visiting Avram Avinu and the magnificent feast which Avram rushes to set before them. Many of the commentators, particularly the later commentators, seem very disturbed by the idea that in the midst of this feast that Avram Avinu could possibly have served the angels a combination of milk and meat. And the pasuk says that he brought them chem'ah, he brought them butter, and then he brought them meat. Now, the simplest explanations are those of commentators like the Bechor Shor and the Chizkuni, who turn around and say, listen, even according to the stringent halakha of today, he first brought the chem'ah, which is the milk, and thereafter he brought the meat, and therefore there should be no issue. But some of the commentators, the Balei Tosfot and others, claim that indeed there was milk and meat served to the angels, and possibly even cooked together. Now, this opens the portal onto the discussion of whether or not the forefathers and foremothers kept the mitzvot, which is a fascinating discussion as a whole. But some of the commentators really allow us to use it to reflect on the deeper purpose of mitzvot and of Torah. Most famously, the Rambam, in his Hakdama to the Perusha Mishnayot, in his introduction to his commentary on the Mishnah, he raises this question. He quotes the Gemara in Brachot, Daf Chet Amud Aleph, where the Gemara says, "Ein lo lakadosh baruch hu ba'olamo ela arba amot shel halacha bilvad," which states that Hashem only has in His world the 4 square cubits of halacha. Now, in the Gemara over there, it specifically locates the statement post the destruction of the temple. After the temple was destroyed, Hashem only had these 4 cubits. But the Rambam doesn't look at it that way. He says the Gemara has said that Hashem only has this in the world. And he says, how's that possible? And he explicitly says, are you saying that before the giving of the Torah, Hashem had no portion in this world? And he says, what about Shem and Aver? What about the very famous Yeshiva mentioned in the Midrash? What did they learn there? If there was no formal halacha, because that was only given at Sinai, then what did they have? Did they do nothing? He says, nonsense. Of course they learned. What did they learn? He says, they learned the deeper metaphysical truths, what he calls mada, and ma'asim tovim, good deeds. What are good deeds? The acquisition of this golden mean, the Aristotelian golden mean, the balance between midot, the balance between all of our character traits. And he says, that is what the forefathers learned. That is what the forefathers practiced. Now, for many of us, this is a startling statement, because it seems to say that there was no real sense of mitzvah observance at all, and that also there's a decoupling of the inner truths of Torah from mitzvot. And indeed, in certain places, the Rambam seems to say that. In one of his letters, he famously states that Aristotle reached the highest level possible, barring prophets. And that is a difficult concept for many of us to accept. The Maharal in the Tiferet Yisrael, in the 19th and 20th chapters, takes issue with this idea. In fact, I would posit that the whole of the Tiferet Yisrael is a subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, rebuttal and rejoinder to many of the foundational ideas in the Moreh Nevuchim and in the rationalist philosophers in general. The Maharal creates and presents a framework of Torah observance of the forefathers. And he says, in general, the forefathers had a tremendous focus, particularly on mitzvot aseh. And he creates a structure then. He says there were 3 levels of observance of the forefathers of mitzvot aseh. Either they were actually commanded to keep one, or alternatively, they resonated with the mitzvot aseh personally to such an extent it was almost as if they were commanded to keep it. And then finally, Yitzchak and Yaakov Avinu received through a Masorah the mitzvot aseh from Avram Avinu, and they kept the mitzvot aseh. They didn't fall into the first 2 categories simply because they were a Masorah. Now, what is disturbing about the Rambam is that he seems to be positing the achievement of spiritual greatness detached from formal mitzvah observance, which is very concerning, and it comes up in many places. Nevertheless, when one combines both of these approaches and really extracts from them the real value and worth, one gets a complementary approach. The Maharal's approach is, at the end of the day, mitzvot are so primal, so part of the structure of the world, that they've always existed and been here from the beginning, and therefore it's inconceivable that the Avot did not keep them on some level and resonate with them, because that is the way to bond with Hashem's will. Because as Rav Lichtenstein would always say, Zatzal, that we need to feel that we are mitzuvim, that we are commanded, and the very act of acceptance of that commandment creates a bond with Hashem. And that is the Maharal's approach in the 7th and 9th chapters of the Tiferet Yisrael. On the other hand, the Rambam is pushing us to dig deeper, to look at the deeper undercurrents, not to suffice with a formal observance of mitzvah on a superficial level, but to dig deeper, to delve, to learn more, to understand more, to reach the deepest level, the DNA of mitzvot that we can. Shabbat Shalom.